President Falk, faculty, distinguished guests, fellow medalists, most importantly, the wonderful class of 2015. Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor and pleasure to be here, not just for Convocation, but for this wonderful day where we're dedicating this incredibly beautiful new Sawyer Library. And I'm thrilled to be with you for that, and I'm thrilled to be with you for the start of this year, a conversation about the book Unbound. And coming into this conversation about books, bound and unbound, I've been thinking a lot about one of my favorite Williams stories, and it's one that I'm sure everyone here knows. How in September 1821, Zephaniah Swift-Moore, the second president of Williams College, skulked out of town in the dead of night, leaving the wilderness of western Massachusetts to build that other school in the tamer lands of the Pioneer Valley, taking with him not only 15 students, but key volumes from the Williams College Library. Now, it's a fantastic story, one of the best. It's just the sort of thing that we need to justify our centuries-old rivalry with Amherst College. And the only problem with it is that it's probably not true. So yeah, President Moore left, and yes, 15 students left with him, and there's what we might call a lack of clarity about the 700 books that formed Amherst's initial library. But there's no actual evidence that these were our books. In fact, actually what we have is evidence to the contrary. There are all of these records of student societies at Williams voting to keep the books here. So we actually have no good historic justification for this. It's possible instead that this story came around as an explanation for just how bad the Williams Library was in the early 1800s. In 1821, it would not have been a hard thing to steal the Williams Library. Williams only had 2 buildings, 2 professors, 2 tutors, 1,400 volumes, which was not a huge expansion from the original library we started with, which was 360 books in a single bookcase in West College that you could only access 1 day a week by going to the librarian and requesting one of them. And the truth is, you probably didn't want to read these books anyway, because they were really dusty old books of theology. The truth is, if you wanted to read anything from the sciences or anything from literature at Williams in the 1800s, you were going to go to a student-run society where students were pooling their money and buying books. But the funny thing about this is this ancient legend actually isn't all that ancient. Dustin Griffith, whose class of 1965, wrote a terrific essay looking at the origins of this myth, and he points out that when he came to Williams in the early 1960s, this is not a story that we told. This was not in common parlance. This was not something that we all tell each other to get ourselves psyched up for the game against Amherst. But somewhere around 1960, there's evidence of John Chandler, who was then the dean of the faculty, visiting Amherst's beautiful new library and saying, "We've come to get our books back." So somewhere between the early 1960s, where no one knows about this, and about 1965, this myth sort of comes into full focus. By the time I'm here in the early 1990s, this was just sort of accepted as gospel truth. You know, this is a really simple explanation for our inherent moral superiority over our neighbors to the east. And that was really helpful because, of course, many of us had also applied to attend that other institution, and we needed some reason to sort of justify to ourselves why we had made the right choice. So, look, this is interesting because this is a myth that in the grand scheme of things, it's fairly recent, but it's got some really powerful explanatory properties. We want to look at this myth a little bit and sort of ask, what does it say about us? What does it say about our culture here at Williams? That one of our origin stories is the story about losing these books. Now, when I've heard this story told, the books are almost always told sort of as the last straw. So yes, they gave up on the Purple Valley, and they took our college president, and they took our students, and can you believe that they actually had the nerve to take our books? So somehow bibliolarceny is a more serious crime than sort of any other form of theft. It's not maybe as serious as proposing the extermination of Native Americans with smallpox blankets, but it is that story is true, by the way. Not that he did it, but it does show up in his letters that he proposes, actually, anyway. Lord Jeff, people, not a nice man. Somehow bibliolarceny is worth special consideration. Books have a special symbolic place in our culture. The burning of books, whether it's by the Mongols when they sacked Baghdad in the 9th century, or whether it's the burning of degenerate texts by the Nazis in the 1930s, or whether it's American extremists burning the Quran today, it isn't just about destroying an object. It's a symbolic destruction of a people, a culture, a way of thinking. Whether we're banning books from library shelves, whether we're burning them, whether we're stealing them, we're talking about shrinking the universe of cultural possibilities, limiting the number of different ways we can look at the world through the eyes of authors. And I think that's why this story has a special significance in the context of a college. Even before 1965, when the story sort of gained its currency, college was a place to come and expand your worldview. The process of packing up, leaving your hometown, going to live with a new set of people, it's constructed not just to give you access to a different set of teachers, but to a different and broader set of friends and influences. And in 1965, when this myth started to take root, colleges themselves were shifting. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act mandated access to public schools for African Americans and for women. Williams became coeducational in 1970. When this myth arose, we were right on the cusp of the college experience changing. One from where mostly we were bringing wealthy white men into a place that was deeply multicultural, representing multiple identities, genders, and serving as a bridge to a multicultural world, just as our college council co-presidents were talking about. Against that backdrop of college as bringing us into the widening world, we've got a story about the challenge of building a community out in the wild, finding it too difficult, and then shrinking the horizons of those who were brave enough to stay by taking away their books. So one of the reasons I wanted to think about this story now is that I wonder whether it's got as much currency as it did in the 1960s, or even when I was here in the 1990s. Because we're at a very different moment in our relationship with books, our relationship with information, than we were even 20 years ago. The story of the stolen books is the story from a day of scarce information. Now, most of us feel like we're inundated in information. We feel like we're drowning in it. How do we think about losing part of our library when we've got this apparent infinity of information online? So I published a book, a real book on paper with covers, Rewire, last summer. It looked at this question of what it means to have access to this incredible wealth of global information. And when I started writing this book, I'd been what people refer to as a cyber-utopian. I was someone who really believed the internet was going to make the world smaller, better connected, it was going to lead to more international understanding. And this really seemed obvious to me. It used to be really hard to get news from sub-Saharan Africa or Central Asia. And now you can, open your laptop, you can read a Nigerian newspaper online, you can make a Skype call to Kazakhstan. But the weird thing about this is that as we've gotten more and more information about the world, we're actually choosing to encounter less of it. We have to make thousands of decisions every day about whether we read a story about Ebola, a tweet from Ferguson, a Facebook update from a high school classmate. In aggregate, most of us are getting much less international news than we did in an era of daily newspapers and 3 television channels. What happens is, when we're given a wealth of choices, we have a really strong tendency to opt for the familiar. It's a really basic human tendency. We tend to pay more attention to members of our tribe than to people we've never met and we've got no reason to care about. And this made a lot of sense 500 years ago when we were all living in villages and seeing the same 100 people every day of our lives, and anyone who was from the outside was a threat. But it's a deeply maladaptive strategy for the connected world that we live in right now. We may not know anyone in Monrovia, Liberia, but it's a really short plane flight to the United States. And when you start thinking about a crisis like Ebola, you suddenly realize that that connected world is really a challenge to start paying attention to what's going on elsewhere. So much of my work looks at these questions of how do we maintain a broad view of the world when we have an avalanche of information. And the good news about this is it's directly parallel to the problems that librarians have been having since the dawn of time. It's not just about expanding from 360 volumes to 1,400. The problem is engineering serendipity. It's making the library, or in my case, the internet, both a place where you can take a deep dive in a subject, really find out about something that you care about, but also make a place where you can discover something that's really unexpected and life-changing. So one of the things that I've learned in my work is that it's a lot easier to pay attention to people than it is to places. If there's someone you know and care about who's from Haiti, if you've had the chance to travel there and meet people there, you're going to watch the news differently. You're going to have a connection to that place, a context for any sort of story that you hear. And the events that you hear from Haiti are going to be literally more real to you because there are people that you care about who are directly affected by them. For 10 years, I've been helping run this website called Global Voices. It uses citizen media, whether it's blogs or Twitter, YouTube videos, trying to bring news from around the world. And the reason that we use citizen media is not just that it's a great way to report stories, but it's also a way to give you a human connection to the people who are actually experiencing these circumstances. For people who are reading our site, the Arab Spring wasn't just a political story. It was actually a story of our friends who went out into the streets and then who tried to figure out how to build new governments in places like Egypt and Tunisia. So I started doing this because I wanted to be reading more news of what was coming out of sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason that I wanted to do that is that I spent 5 years off and on living in Ghana trying to help the people of that remarkable nation build up internet businesses and try to figure out how to get fully connected to the rest of the world. And the reason I ended up doing that is that after I was sitting in the seats where you are, I got a 1-year Fulbright grant to go over and study xylophone music in the city of Accra, Ghana. And the reason I ended up doing that is Sandra Burden, who I think should probably be considered a national treasure. And Sandra, along with the late Ernie Brown and Gary Sikowski, founded Kuzika, the African dance ensemble, which was the center of my community in my life when I was here at Williams. And if that looks weird to you for a dorky white guy to have had his center as the African dance ensemble, this is Williams College, allow me to remind you, and this is what's sort of wonderful about the place. So for me, this whole strange and wonderful path my life has taken, from trying to build a technology company on Water Street, to working with internet businesses in Africa, to working with human rights advocates all over the world, to now teaching at MIT, it leads directly back to the dance studios and to the Sun Computer Lab here, and to the professors and to the students who were passionate about a world that was wide enough not just to include this beautiful valley, but to include both Africa and the internet. And so the next time you visit Sawyer Library, I would ask you to think about the ways in which it's incredibly carefully curated. It's designed to make it possible to get lost productively, to discover something unexpected and wonderful. Possibly the only thing more carefully curated at Williams than this library is the class that you're part of. We've got an almost infinite capacity to put information on shelves, whether it's physical books or whether it's virtual shelves. But the opportunity to be in this place with these people for 4 years is decidedly finite. So I'm grateful for the effort that went into giving me a universe of a couple of thousand people who challenged me and invited me to discover new ways of looking at the world. Because this is something that college does very consciously. And we do it for the simple reason that we know that who you know is going to help determine who you are. And I don't mean this in the very narrow sense of if you're sitting next to someone who starts the next Facebook, maybe you can get a job and get stock options. I actually mean this in a much, much broader sense. Who you know, what you care about, tends to determine how you're going to view the world, what you pay attention to, and it's ultimately going to shape your path through the world. So like the library, like the internet, the class of 2015 is too big to know. But if the challenge of a really great library is not just to explore what you already know, what you already care about, the challenge here is the same. To challenge yourself to expand your picture of the world by expanding who you know and who you care about. So here's what Zephaniah Swift-Moore really took from Williams when he left from Amherst. He took 15 students. That was 20% of the student body. We can think of those mythical stolen books as shrinking the universe, what we could learn out of those volumes. But we should think about losing those students in the same way, losing the opportunity to see the world through their different sets of eyes. We're always going to have to make choices about who we know, what we read, what we care about. We never get to read every book, even when there's only 360 on the shelves. We're never going to get to know the people around us as well as they deserve to be known. But we can make decisions to choose a wider world. In ways I never expected, Williams launched me into the world that's wider than I had ever imagined. I'm eternally grateful for that, and I hope the same for you.